Hi, Julie.
Hi, Wendy, and hi, everyone. I'm Julie Cooper, a mystery and thriller writer and half of the duo bringing you Kendall and Cooper Talk Mysteries, a regular podcast series. Before we begin, I'd like to give credit to my brother, Chris Squires, for our great intro and exit music, his original composition and performance of The Man in the Panama Hat. Now, we have a special guest author with us today, coming all the way from Alaska, and I know Wendy's anxious to talk about our theme for the podcast and to introduce her to you.
Wendy Kendall here, cozy writer and all mysteries lover. Today we want to talk about something at the heart of legal mystery thrillers that I think is captured by the momentous line delivered by Jack Nicholson as Colonel Nathan R. Jessup to Tom Cruise as Lieutenant Daniel Kaffee in A Few Good Men.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Dominating what a reader, viewer wants from these stories is a successful search to puzzle out and piece together the truth of a situation. And what we see in so many of the great stories is a struggle with whether there is a single truth. Different characters are following their own truth, including the protagonist, the accused, different witnesses. The challenge for these writers is how to honestly advocate all the viewpoints, and then can the writer reveal a single truth in a trial on the pages? In these books, the reader is the judge. Our guest today is Keenan Powell, mystery writer and practicing attorney in Anchorage, Alaska. Look for her legal column called Ipso Facto, written for the Sisters in Crime group's Guppies newsletter called The First Draft. The Guppies are, as yet, unpublished writers in the group. She's also an interesting and vivid blogger on her Mysteristas blog. And her short story, The Velvet Slippers, was recently selected to be published by Malice Domestic 12, Mystery Most Historical, which will be published by Wildside Press in time for Malice 29, which is April 28th through 30th this year. Another of her short stories, The Cattle Raid of Adams, will be published by Level Best Books in its Busted anthology. Congratulations and welcome, Keenan Powell. What's the weather up in Anchorage today?
Thank you for having me. It is snowing, so as soon as we finish chatting, I'm going out and starting to clear the driveway.
Oh.
It's my avocation in the winter. Yeah.
Ah.
Wow.
It keeps me fit, though.
Oh, well, that's the silver lining, as they say. Well, Keenan, can you please weigh in on our premise that readers look to our fictional courtroom mysteries for a fight and a search that ends in the single truth?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what in real life courtroom is all about, is, good versus evil, and the truth versus obfuscation or untruths, depending on how kind you want to be about your opponent's case. And the attorneys are all true believers. The ones that stay in trial litigation are true believers. And so I kind of got bitten with that bug. And I think that people who look at courtroom dramas look for that too, and which gives the author an opportunity to expose a different point of view. To someone who's there to think about this particular subject and to look at these things. It can be a lot of fun when you work that into the puzzle.
Well, what does a writer have to do to make a single truth at the end, a single judgment that's satisfying for the readers, since each reader approaches a story with their own varying truths? I mean, there's character arcs. Are there also readers' arcs?
I believe there are, and the first time that I was really impressed with that was when I read Charles Todd's book, A Fearsome Doubt, which is about the death penalty. And I don't feel like he ever feeds you the answer that he thinks that you should believe. And in trials, when we're advocating to juries, we don't try to feed them the right answer. Obviously, we want to win. We want them to vote for us. But the solution that the juror comes to and the solution that the reader comes to by themselves after you've given them the evidence is the one that they will own. And that will be satisfying to the reader. I don't think they want to be preached to, but still you can use the tools of advocacy when you're writing to advance the position that you would prefer.
Oh, that's interesting. I guess I never thought about it that way. I thought of it more persuasive, but it's presenting the facts and then let them come to their own conclusion. It's interesting. You know, the law is very complex, and as an outsider, I see it as kind of convoluted. As a writer, how do you simplify it for the reader while still representing it well?
Well, I don't get into the legal the fineries of law, unless it's really essential to my story. And then when I do, I just pick one law. I just pick one aspect and I break it down and I repeat it and rework it. And Charles would call it looping. For instance, when you ask a witness a question, you want to ask them whether or not they saw someone drive through the intersection that day. You said, "Did you see a car?" And he says, "Yes." I said, "Did you see a red car?" That's looping. "Yes." "Did you see a red car driven by a woman?" And the answer is yes. That's looping. So you do the same technique when you're writing, constantly looping this concept, this legal concept you want in tiny little digestible morsels so that the reader can take it, digest it, and then work with it.
Oh. Well, as a cozy writer, I struggle between whether the character's the thing or the puzzle's the thing. And you've blogged about how, like other writers, mystery writers craft characters and setting, but they have to frame that in their story within a puzzle. Is the puzzle really the thing for legal mystery readers?
If you want a mystery, yeah. If you're a mystery reader, you want a puzzle. A lot of people superimpose thrillers into their books, so they have a mystery going with the thriller at the same time. You could do legal thrillers instead, the Grisham, those kind of guys. I think that's more of what their style is. But definitely, and I'm a mystery reader, I don't care for thrillers as much. I want some, but I don't mind if both of them are represented there, as long as I have some intellectual stimulation.
I see. Yeah. Well, what are the components for a compelling courtroom scene?
Drama, of course, high drama, and that's what they teach us in trial advocacy in real life. It's got to be dramatic. The jury wants to see clear-cut distinction between your side and their side. And you don't actually have to spell it out all the time. Sometimes you can leave it in subtext, but you just have to keep hammering away at it. My favorite thing to do is take apart witnesses. I like taking, a witness that's adversarial to me and take apart their testimony, walk them down the garden path, and prove that they are not credible. And that's fun to do. Yeah, it's fun to do writing.
Wow. What are the ways that you may have your characters hide their motives and their true selves?
There's always lying. Lies are good. And there was one Agatha Christie that I read or I watched. I don't remember which one it was, and I don't know if it was a Perot or Miss Marple or what. But I remember that she went through the whole process of interviewing all the witnesses, and everything they said was a lie. And then she goes through and she re-interviews all the witnesses, and they give a teeny tiny bit of truth that you could construe a different way, and that they were trying to lead you to construe it in a way that was favorable to them. And once she collected all these teeny tiny truths and put them all together, then the the puzzle came together, that they were all lying, but you had to rearrange the puzzle pieces. I thought that was so clever.
Wow, yeah. That's kind of the way that you're looking to emulate, sort of, or weave some of that in?
I would love to be able to do that as slickly as she was. She was amazing. She was just amazing.
Well, what do you find the most fun parts to write about on each side of the bench? Like on the defense and then on the prosecution, what's the most fun for each?
For me, it's a defense. It's challenging because I was a defense lawyer, criminal defense lawyer for a long time. And, we espoused, if you stay in criminal defense at all, you espouse the position that the prosecution is this great train trying to just corral everybody and throw them in prisons, and these people don't care, and they're just there to collect their paychecks, but we're fighting for truth and justice and for freedom in the Constitution. And so it's pretty easy for me to get into that mindset, but then I move into the prosecution mindset, because you got to, because you don't want a two-dimensional character in the prosecutor, and it's more of a challenge for me to look at their point of view and advocate from their position. And it's not as fun, but you got to do it. And then as far as judges go, I don't think I'd make a very good judge. I just writing the middle. Who wants to be there? There are people who've got to do it. Someone's got to do it, but it's not fun for me.
You like writing that passion, it sounds like.
I do.
Well, talk about an intriguing setting. Alaska is very appealing that way. Can you tell us a little bit about how the Alaskan setting maybe influences your writing?
Oh, yeah. I use the cold. If I have one whole book that's set in the winter, it's this time of year. It starts with the Russian Orthodox Christmas celebration, which is called Starring. That's on January 7th. And, of course, a person disappears, and there's lots of snow, and there's lots of cold and dark that complicates finding this person. And then a big Chinook wind comes, and big and Chinook are redundant, but we say it anyway. Big Chinook wind comes, and they come. We had one just yesterday, and they'll be like 40 degrees after we've had below freezing for weeks, and they'll suddenly melt everything, and the wind's blowing at 30 knots. And frequently a body will turn up.
Wow.
And so that's what happens in my book. And in another book, the next book I'm starting, I'm going to work with what's called the Pineapple Express. And that is essentially, it's a hurricane that comes up from the South Pacific, but by the time it gets here, because it's no longer a tropical storm, they don't call it a hurricane, but there's lots of water and 100-mile-an-hour winds. And generally, this little town of Seward gets flooded and isolated, so I'm going to use that in my next book.
Wow.
It should be fun.
So all the extremes, that it sort of reflects the extremes of life and death. That is extremes.
It is. And the people who live here, who choose to live here, are a different breed. So it's reflected in that. I mean, I believe that there are people who are really uncomfortable with being inside. They rather be outside all of the time. But it's funny that they don't like, if they come to your office, they won't get out of the car and walk a block. But these are people who walk hundreds of miles in the woods. And then we have the fisher people, and we have the hunters, and then we have, very avid ecologist types and lots of hikers. And then we have people who don't care about that stuff at all. They think it's all silly. They just want to be warm and comfortable, and they ended up here maybe by mistake, or they were born here. And when there's a very small group of people that are central to Anchorage itself. And before the pipeline was beginning to be built in the 70s, there was only 35,000 people here. And Anchorage was founded in 1900. So those 35,000 people are pretty much from the people who descended from people who founded Anchorage, and a few more that came in, like with the Air Force, during World War II or the Army and during the earthquake in 1964. So it was a small kernel in this community, and all of us, the rest of us, have grown around it. And it's still a feeling of, if you weren't born here, you're different.
Oh.
My kids are born here, but I'm not born here. So, and you will get into different social circles whether or not you're born here.
Wow, that is really interesting. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of inspiration there for really diverse characters.
There is quite a bit. And we still have the sourdoughs. We have the miners and the choppers who live out there off the land.
Wow. Well, can you tease us a little bit about your currently unpublished Maeve Malloy series?
Yeah, Maeve Malloy is a criminal defense attorney. She's a young woman. She's in private practice, sole practice. And she is working with a private investigator who works pretty much solely for her, Tom Sinclair, and he came with her from the public defender's office. She was kind of run out of the public defender's office after she went through alcohol rehabilitation, and they didn't want her around anymore because they said that they were worried that she would be unstable now that they knew that she was a recovering alcoholic. And they weren't going to let her go to court anymore, and she could do a desk job, grind out motions or do something else, but she wanted to be in court. So she started her own practice, and she's taking on cases. So she's going through her own arc of figuring out what it's like to be a grown-up sober, and she has Tom Sinclair to guide her. She has another older attorney, Arthur Nelson, who's kind of her mentor. And in her first case she takes on is a homeless man, and she takes his case on when his attorney commits suicide 3 weeks before trial. And she takes it to trial. And this homeless man is accused of killing his drinking buddy. But he was drunk, so he doesn't remember what happened. So she has to find out what happened in 3 weeks while she's dealing with her own alcohol issues fresh out of rehab.
Oh my gosh, that sounds really... I can't wait to read that.
Thank you.
That sounds really intriguing. I mean, what an unreliable witness and defendant. That's wow.
Yeah, and on the surface, not particularly sympathetic one. So I spent a lot of time working, I think, with him to make him more sympathetic.
Well, okay, Julie, I guess it's your turn to cross-examine our guest. I mean, what are your questions for Keenan?
Well, I do have some questions for Keenan. And Keenan, I know you write in your blog about having grown up on Air Force bases. Have you ever thought about writing a military mystery? And the reason I ask is I'm a Navy brat, so I just had to ask you this question.
Oh, okay. Not at all. I think us brats are really a little bit different than the people who actually serve. And we have a different point of view. So I could write about being a brat, but really I don't know anything about being in the service.
All right.
So no, I hadn't thought about it. There's a really good book on it I think it's called Military Brats. It was done by a investigative journalist, maybe 30 years ago, about how our different personalities are formed for people like us that have grown up that way. Now I think they call them third culture kids.
There's got to be a label for everything, right?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. And I know you've also spoken very honestly about dealing with writer's block, something that has plagued many of us that have been writing over a number of years. Do you have any suggestions for some of our listeners who are also writers who might be afflicted?
The least painful tool I use is just to write stream of consciousness. Just not worry about word count today, not worry about a product today, just to pour something out. And it might be, psychologically a good exercise for me. But what I try to do as I am writing is really dig deep into what my feelings are and how I'm going to explain those and show those in the setting, in the word choice, things like that. Really work on the art of writing, but do it just, last time I did it with standing in line at the coffee shop in the airport. I started there. And just seeing things, and worked into a little story, and it's a little story, but I don't know if I'll ever, work into something published. So it's not a mystery. So, yeah, that's what I do. And it makes me, at least, and then I get a little bit self-esteem for the day. And move on into the next time. Yeah, finish whatever project I was working on.
Okay. So it just kind of unblocks you, and you just are not worried about the product, but more just the process of writing and putting
and
words
I
out
tell
there.
myself, it's beneficial. It's beneficial just in a different way. I'm not getting my word count in for the day, but I'm working on my art.
Great. Well, I sort of agree with that. I think any day you can write anything is a good day. So I completely agree with that. And you had once said, the inspiration for all my books is some form of injustice. And I've mentioned in some of the writing workshops that Wendy and I have co-presented and produced that the best fiction, at least to me, seems to all boil down to one word, whether you want to call it a theme, a message, an essence, or I think the Germans call a leitmotif, the reason for being. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that relates to why you write?
Yeah, I think justice would be my theme, and it's something I have been passionate about since I was a little kid. Seeing people that were not treated as well or differently because unfairly. And even now, and I'm an attorney by day, that's what gets me fired up. I take cases where I feel a great injustice, and that's what carries me through. And I think that kind of stuff is what you're hardwired for. You're or you're not, or whatever moves us. But that's always been it for me. It's fairness.
Great. Good. Well, that's a big topic and certainly something, valuable to write about. Question for you. Could you tell us a little bit more about Malice Domestic? I know a little bit about it in that it's a fan convention, but what makes it special, and if someone loves traditional mysteries, should they think about going to Malice Domestic?
Oh, absolutely. It is wonderful. It's just so much fun. It's 3 days. We take over this hotel. And until midnight, there will be people standing around in little clutches talking, just so excited to see each other. There are lots of authors that go there. You have an opportunity to meet authors, even if you're not a writer. You're just a fan. You'll have an opportunity to meet these people who write this stuff. I mean, I've met Hank Philippi Ryan through it, Reese Bowen, Charles Todd, who I followed around like a puppy, he and his mother. Like people were saying, you're stalking these people, leave them alone. And, oh goodness, Martin Edwards, who won, he swept all the awards last year with his book on the Golden Age, his nonfiction book on the Golden Age of writing, the Agatha Christie era. Art Taylor, who swept the awards with his book of short stories, actually, but it was a theme, and I can't remember it, but he's very hot. And then, of course, the Grant. So this year, there are 3 people who won the Grant before I did who are shortlisted for either Best First or Best Contemporary. And another cool thing is when you go to Malice Domestic, they've listed the nominees, the short list of the nominees on the website. Read all their books. The short story nominations are available by links. You can read all the short stories, and you show up the first day and you get to vote. All you have to do is attend the convention to vote. You don't have to belong to like Mystery Writers of America. And you, the fans, get to choose who wins the Agatha. And then there's the Agatha Award, and everybody dresses up for the banquet, and it's the best chocolate desserts ever. And lots of fun people, and they have a good time. And then there's an auction. And they raise money for a literacy project. And then there's big book signing events, and and there's a hospitality suite, and it's just a wonderful time. It's all about mystery. And then, of course, there are little rooms set aside for different panels. So you'll get a panel on beaches. People write about mysteries on beaches, or you'll get a panel about historicals. And they're not from the writer's point of view so much as from their writers on the panels. You have to be published to be on the panel, but things that the fans would be interested in.
Oh, okay.
So they're not how-to. They're just talking about the experience and why we love this particular teeny tiny genre.
Right. Sounds great. And is it usually on the East Coast, or does it alternate between coasts?
No, it's always in Bethesda.
Always in Bethesda, Maryland.
Bethesda,
okay.
Maryland.
Right.
Yeah, so I fly into Ronald Reagan.
Uh-huh. Okay, great. Great. Well, I think I'm going to have to put that on my bucket list, because that sounds like a great event and a great experience. So.
Oh, it is. It's terrific.
Oh, it sounds wonderful. Wendy had mentioned to me earlier that you've written an award-winning short story called The Velvet Slippers. And
well, it's not actually award-winning, but yeah. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
That's all right. Could you tell us a little bit about your inspiration for this story?
Yes. My inspiration for this story is actually working in law offices, and being a female attorney, I tend to gravitate socially to paralegals. And I've been around for 30 years. And 30 years ago, there weren't that many female attorneys. And I'd always be in a law office full of men, and all the women were paralegals. And so I was more in tune with how paralegals feel about the male lawyers. And there's this gender divide. And there was some sexism going on,
Sure.
Yeah, and it was in a lot of resentment. So I worked with it quite a bit, and ended up with a character who's actually a housekeeper in 19th century Adams, Massachusetts, and she hates her boss, who she's entrenched
I like
with
the story
emotionally.
already. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was the inspiration, was that dynamic that I had seen between female paralegals and male attorneys.
Okay. Fascinating. All right. And I know that our guests often treat us to a reading from an excerpt from their writing. Would you be willing to read a little bit for our listeners from The Velvet Slippers?
Sure. Let me see. I've got a little bit here.
That would be great.
The Velvet Slippers. It's autumn 1895 in North Adams, Massachusetts. In the grayness before dawn, Mildred carefully lifted the bed covers and placed one foot, then another, on floorboards so cold they burned her feet. The fire in the hearth had long since died out. Only dark cinders and white ash remained. Her rustling hadn't wakened him. He wheezed and bubbled, jerked and flinched, as he had done in his sleep all night long and for many nights prior. With each exhalation, the tang of vomit and the iron smell of blood seeped from his body. She had grown accustomed to the odor. She straightened her nightcap and stood, more slowly than she had in years gone by. She searched the shadows with her toes, seeking the velvet slippers, little defense that they were to the chill. But she wore them every night just the same. It pleased him. She gathered her dressing gown from the foot of the bed and tied it tightly around her sickened middle. Before leaving, she looked upon him one more time. He was, as before, unconscious but contorted as he clutched at his stomach. When she opened the heavy oak door, its creaking roused him. "What?" he choked out, his voice thick with phlegm. "Just fetching your porridge," she whispered. He cleared his throat. "No porridge, just tea. Sweet tea." He pulled the blanket over his shoulder and rolled away from her. "As you wish." She softly pulled the door closed. On the landing, she nearly crashed into young Edmund. "Well now," he said. 22 years of age, his fair hair greasy with sweat, frock coat draped upon an arm, shoes in hand, and a top hat askew upon his head. Edmund was sneaking up the broad stairway yet again, a habit he had acquired since his return from Cambridge. He gave her a wicked grin and tipped his hat. Top of the morning to you, Mrs. Muntz." Then he sauntered by, dragging the stink of whiskey and cigars in his wake. Were she to ask, he'd claimed he was playing whist with a few Irish louts at the Hibernian Club, but she suspected he spent the night losing his uncle's money and what was left of his own shame at the brothel where snaggle-toothed girls sold their wares and men of all ages and callings contracted unspeakable diseases. She didn't ask. She would not give him the satisfaction. In the kitchen, she stoked the cooker's fire and added milk to the oats that had been soaking all night. As the porridge simmered, she walked down the dark hallway to the servants' quarters, no longer occupied by anyone but herself. Mildred changed out of her nightclothes and into her maid's uniform, a black dress and a white apron. She sat on her cot and pulled off the slippers that the master had given her years before. There you go.
That is
Great.
so vivid.
That is so good. I can see that house. I can smell it. I can hear the floorboards creak. That's just wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Terrific.
Well, now it's time for some personal segments as part of our podcast. And for me, I'm calling this segment, It Leaves a Mark. And although that sounds more like a P.D. James mystery title, it's really based on something very disturbing and tragic that happened near my house this week. And it made me think about crime and death and certainly murder mysteries. I'm fortunate to live in a nice, quiet, middle-class suburb where nothing much ever happens. It's near a lovely wooded park, the kind of setting where kids play Little League games, joggers roam the trails, and people come to the dog park to walk man's best friend. It's just down the road and across the street. I can see the tops of trees in the park from my office window. On Wednesday afternoon, I heard fire department aid trucks racing down the road, sirens at full volume, followed suddenly by the sound of a helicopter hovering overhead for a long time, then sweeping our neighborhood. Never a good sign. After what happened, I'm thinking today about murder, the capital crime, the taking of another life, and how some novelists who write mystery or suspense seem more motivated by increasing the body count without giving much thought to what this act truly signifies, even in a fictional sense. They spend little attention on the victim, who's often only a chalk outline of a character. They don't consider or show the aftermath, the effect on everyone left behind. In my opinion as a writer, this is lacking from a lot of current suspense and especially thriller fiction, and I wonder why. It's an opportunity for writers to provide depth and resonance to their fiction, not just another disposable, two-dimensional character. It's an opportunity for writers to acknowledge that violent crime results in terrible pain, and then to show how this changes everyone around that event. Without going into graphic detail, a young man lost his life as a result of someone's impulsive and selfish act. He interrupted a car prowl and auto theft and was killed because of it. This terrible, destructive act was horrible in its impact on the victim's girlfriend who witnessed it, his family, his friends, his coworkers, and on our neighborhood. Those of us who live nearby will never look at that park in quite the same way. There's something broken in our emotional landscape. It leaves a mark, and like the very best, most thoughtful fiction, it should. Over to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Julie. That really gives us a lot to think about as people in a community and as writers. Today I wanted to talk about, in fiction, there's attorneys that we love and lawyers that we love to hate. And the distinction, I think, is more than semantics, but looking strictly at the connotations that I think surround the two words, attorney and lawyer. For me, I think if you're for me, you're my attorney. And if you're against me, you're just a lawyer. An attorney believes in the case or the situation or the circumstances, and that's who I want on my side. I want what's right. I don't like, as they say in the Jurassic Park stories, the blood-sucking lawyer or the ambulance chasers. Back to the movie In a Few Good Men, we start out with distinct legal characters who I think struggle with these connotations. Joanne Galloway, played by Demi Moore, is my kind of attorney who will fight the good fight and not back down. She's on a crusade for truth. Unfortunately, her fervor is a bad fit in the courtroom. Daniel Caffey, played by Tom Cruise, is a great wheeler dealer, plea bargaining an incredible number of cases in his first 9 months as a lawyer. It's the game of the system, and he excels at it. All these faceless and nameless cases that he's compromised on, these people never got to have their day in court. Caffey sums up the distance between Galloway and himself. He starts out with an argument with one of the defendants, Dawson, who had asked Tom Cruise, or Daniel Caffey, Dawson asked him, "Do you think we were right?" Caffey never answers that. Instead, he says, "I think you'd lose." Later, Caffey tells Galloway, "You and Dawson, you both live in the same dream world. It doesn't matter what I believe. It only matters what I can prove. So don't tell me what I know or don't know. I know the law." Galloway sums it up from her perspective. "My feeling is that if this case is handled in the same fast food, slick-ass Persian bazaar manner with which you seem to handle everything else, something's going to get missed. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I allowed Dawson and Downey to spend any more time in prison than absolutely necessary because their attorney had predetermined the path of least resistance." The lawyer on the other side is Smilin' Jack Ross, played by Kevin Bacon, who's driven by a strong desire for court justice. To me, justice is a legal concept by which fairness is administered, and that's where his negotiations come from. First offering 20-year sentence, and then Caffey, in response, demands for 12 because they got help, as he says. They called an ambulance. And after Caffey brought up the code red, oh no, Smilin' Jack, he knew there was a promotion on the line for the colonel, so he compromises, finally offering 2 years sentence and out in 6 months. The writer skillfully tells the story of each of these characters' journey of growth, exploring these issues. Screenwriter Aaron Sorkin got the inspiration to write this play from a phone conversation with his sister Deborah, who had graduated from Boston University Law School and had signed up for a 3-year stint with the U.S. Navy Judge Advocate General's Corps. She was going to Guantanamo Bay to defend a group of Marines who came close to killing a fellow Marine in a hazing that was ordered by a superior officer. Sorkin took that information and wrote much of his story on cocktail napkins while bartending at the Palace Theater on Broadway. When he went home after work, he would empty his pockets of napkins and type them into his Mac laptop. My book recommendation this time is inspired by that. It's from an author whose legal thrillers are also inspired by real cases. This recommendation is Bodily Harm by Robert Dugoni. This book is part of the David Sloan series. This is a character who really gets your passions soaring and your blood pounding. He is one of those who is fighting for what's right, but is also a very effective litigator. Best of both worlds on my account. But that doesn't mean any of it is easy. This time, Seattle attorney David Sloan is on a case against a doctor who's charged with being negligent, leading to a child's death. But did Sloan have all the information when he presented his winning case so effectively? What information was missing, and was the real case actually against a toy company? You'll be caught up in the fight for what's right against fully developed villains who have their own motivations and points of view. And what Robert Dugoni writes so well, injecting the thriller in his legal mystery, this fight occurs inside and outside the courtroom as well. As the author said in an interview, things happen in our lives that give us a jolt, that surprise us, humble us, and sometimes scare us. We're faced with triumph and tragedy. I wanted the same for David Sloan. I knew I was going to do something to blow up his world. As a reader, get ready for a legal thriller about people caught up in a fight that's a deadly tug of war. Hey, Keenan, do you have a recommendation for our listeners?
I do, but I want to say I love that book, too. I read that book, and I love the entire David Sloan series, but the one that you discussed was one of my favorites of that series. There is a book now that is very hot. It came out this year. It's from a new writer, but he's not a youngster. His name is Joe Ide, I-D-E, and his book is IQ. And what I really like about this book is that it's very Holmesian in structure, in the mystery. And the protagonist, this is the first book in the series, is a guy who's kind of an introvert. He's different than everybody else, and but he is definitely smarter than anybody in the room at any time. He's not quite as arrogant about it as Sherlock Holmes, but that is how he makes his living, by providing investigative services to whomever asks for it, and he is paid by them in any way that they can, and he just trusts them that he'll be able to make a living doing this. And it's set in contemporary Los Angeles area. I don't remember exactly where, but it's kind of a rough neighborhood. And it's just a wonderful traditionally structured, traditional mystery. I'm really impressed with it. It's shortlisted for the Ickers this year for first best.
Great. I'm going to have to look for that one, definitely. Well, I'm recommending a film this time, and it's titled Genius, based on the book Maxwell Perkins, editor of Genius. The book was written by A. Scott Berg. The screenplay for the film was written by John Logan, who's a 4-time Academy Awards nominee. And it features an all-star cast, including Colin Firth, Jude Law, Nicole Kidman, Laura Linney, and Dominic West. And it covers the true golden age of publishing, right about the time period when they were publishing a lot of these more traditional mysteries, the Agatha Christie's and so forth. But this starts back in 1939, back when publishing houses shaped their authors' careers and editors actually did editing. Max Perkins, a legendary editor, is shown editing the volatile personality and amazing work of Southern writer Thomas Wolfe, as well as the work of F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway. And the film reveals the mystery, I guess you could say, of how a creative work is transformed from a sheet of loose paper and nurtured and brought to the public, along with the story of an amazing and unlikely friendship. There are no car chases, no murders, no explosions, no femme fatale. Okay, maybe there's one in here, but just an intriguing series of characters and insights into writing, publishing, and human connection. Highly recommended. I think RogerEbert.com has referred to it as a film of conspicuous intelligence, and in spite of that, it's well worth a look. I think you will enjoy it if you're interested at all in the process of creativity or writing, or even writer's block. And today we've talked a little bit about the single truth, the pursuit of the single truth, injustice, and certainly the aftermath of violent crimes, some pretty heavy subjects. So we're just about wrapped up here. Thank you for joining us, and we want to urge you to keep reading and keep writing.
Thank you, Keenan, and now you have to go out and shovel the snow.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.